Hi, welcome to Culturally Determined. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Tom Bissell. Tom, could you please introduce yourself?
I would be delighted. My name is Tom Bissell. I am a writer. I write magazine pieces. I've written 10 books. I'm also a screenwriter. I've written for multiple big budget video games and a few television shows. So I have a kind of odd career in which I wade around in various ponds of literary output.
Thank you for coming on the show today. We're going to be talking about a piece that you published in Harper's Magazine in the May issue. The headline is, or the title is, Time is a Violent Stream on Losing a Father and Finding Stoicism. I really enjoyed the essay a lot. It's a combination personal essay, exploration of ideas, and you meld together those separate parts really well. So a link, which I think you don't need to be a Harper subscriber to access at least one one link a month or something
You
like
get
that.
one a month. Yeah, you get one freebie a month.
The link to this will be in the notes, or you can, purchase the physical copy of Harper's. Well, why don't we start with the question of what is Stoicism with a capital S, and how is it different from Stoicism with the lowercase s, as when someone says, like, you need to be stoic about this sort of thing, like your father passed away, maybe you need to be more stoic about this. What was the difference?
I tried to be a little less stoic, but found capital S stoic helped me a lot more. Stoicism is an ancient sort of philosophy that began around 300 BCE in Greece. I would say most of the greatest Stoics were the Roman Stoics that came after them. And Stoicism is this systematic way of thinking and method of behavior that has an intent of what many have described as mastering our passions. And so you can probably tell from that Stoicism is a kind of post or intra-crisis philosophy. Like, not a lot of people go to Stoicism on prom night. And it's also a very intimate style of philosophy. There are not a lot of classical Stoic texts that survived, and the ones that do survive, the most notable ones are probably the letters of a Roman statesman and public servant named Seneca. And all the letters he wrote were to individuals, his friends. And Marcus Aurelius would be the other Roman Stoic who wrote the book that I contemplated in my essay, a book called The Meditations. And the thing that is really attractive to me about Stoicism is that it is intimate in a way that other philosophical beliefs aren't. And it's not theological. It's not a dialogue. It's not mystical. It's not catastrophist. It's not apocalyptic. It's not optimistic, certainly. It's human scaled. It feels exactly as big as we are. And I think that's what gives it a lot of its power and comfort. It feels very attainable.
Mm-hmm. So in the common parlance of you need to be stoic about this, or like what's something that's different between the philosophical system and the common, like,
The common
language usage?
So when people say you have to be stoic, they're telling you to turn off your emotions or not to feel emotions or suppress your emotions. Actual capital S Stoicism says nothing about that at all. What it tells you to do is separate your emotions from your judgments and your behavior. And it means that you have to practice that. You have to commit to it. And that means that when something really awful happens and someone wrongs you, your father dies, in my case, rather than making decisions that are mired in grief and mired in anger and mired in resentment, do your best to accept that I'm feeling these things. Don't have any moral judgments about it. Don't judge yourself for being angry that someone cut you off in traffic. But also don't dwell on it, and don't let those emotions determine your behavior, because as Marcus Aurelius says, our beliefs cause our behavior. What we believe causes us to react what we do. So Stoicism says, change your beliefs, you can change your behavior. And a big part of that, of changing your beliefs, is accepting you're going to feel what you're going to feel, but then asking you to actually think and contemplate what it means to take the next step, and try not to do it when you're, lit up and electric with emotion. So small s Stoicism tells you to suppress. Capital S Stoicism tells you to feel. but it also just refuses to make a judgment on the validity of those feelings. It lets them happen, but it asks you to separate them from what you then do.
You begin the essay um, right after your father passed away 2 years ago, and you are grieving, and you're hearing your daughter on her Zoom class talk about her grandfather passing away, and then you see a copy of the meditations on your shelf, and this launches your like contemporary engagement with these ideas. You had read, I think you say you had read the book twice before, but hadn't connected with it
Not at all.
until
Yeah.
this crisis moment. Um, wh- what about the situation? Like, why is this a moment of crisis? Is when you connected with this, whereas as a younger man, it was just another thing that you had read.
I've always had a lot of death terror, and it had gotten worse as I'd gotten older, and it had gotten so bad that maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was not sleeping at night because I was having panic attacks for fully half the night, and hardly anyone in my life knew about this. My partner knew about it, but that was about it. And I was just waking up in a cold sweat, freaking out, thinking about the inevitability of death. And then when I first learned 4 or 5 days before he died that he was maybe in his last stages, I had a full on kind of meltdown. Like I was anticipating it and I was worrying about it. And so what I didn't know is that I was doing something very stoic, which was they have this practice called premeditatio malorum. It's basically the anticipation of awful things. And it's a very important stoic practice because it asks you to think about the worst thing that can happen to you that day and then kind of hone your reaction to it. Think about how you behave. It's if you think calmly on awful things, when the awful thing happens, you'll actually have a plan of response. And it's very similar to this Buddhist tradition of meditating in the presence of dead bodies. And indeed, a lot of people have, called Stoicism kind of Europe's Buddhism in a lot of ways. The Stoic thing I wasn't doing was this process of non-hysterically imagining a really awful outcome and then figuring out ways to stave off the panic because panic never helps. And Stoicism is a pretty good anti-panic medication. And you've talked to cognitive behavioral therapists or psychologists. They refer to this as stress inoculation. So the Stoics were on something 2,000 years ago that psychologists now recognize as a very valid tool. So when my dad died, I had been anticipating it. It called into question my own mortality again, which kind of caused a landslide inside myself. And I'd read it, so I knew it had a bunch of thoughts about death and the inevitability of it and the importance of accepting it with calmness and clarity. And I didn't really know what was going to happen when I pulled it off the shelf, but I was such a wreck. I just decided to start reading. And man, there are some bangers in the first 35 pages of the meditations, just some truly beautiful stuff. Like all the stuff I quote in the piece, those are all meditations that occur, very early in the book. And I was reading them in real time. And it was pretty remarkable how calming I felt, how calming they were to me in that moment. And, he says something about retreating into yourself and finding the doctrines you find within yourself should be few and fundamental so that when you emerge from yourself, you'll be ready to rejoin life again. And that struck me like lightning. And that's when I realized I'm going to really think about this book. I'm going to really read it deeply and I'm going to read other Stoics. And I'll tell you what, I haven't had a nocturnal panic attack since. So I don't know if I believe in Stoicism because it doesn't really give you anything to believe in. It just gives you some tools to think about the ordering of the universe and the utility of the human mind, your own human mind in particular. So as a set of tools, I found it incredibly helpful and actually life changing in a lot of very good ways. So um, it proved almost instantly curative for me in a powerful way.
That your night terrors, or however you want to describe them, that those receded, and you had like a mantra that you repeated to yourself from that you called a prayer for the fearful, lines from Marcus Aurelius. That's quite remarkable. I mean, it's I don't it's impressive. I don't know. It's really something. Because that's the sort of thing that cognitive behavioral therapy and medication combined sometimes will not help you with that sort of issue. So words that were written 2000 or 2500 years ago helping is that's noteworthy for sure. So Stoicism has had sort of a popular revival over the past 10 or 15 years, and
Yeah.
I've read some of these pop books. I don't think aside I haven't read the meditations themselves, but I read Massimo Pigliucci's book about Stoicism, and I
Hmm.
think I have one other one on my shelf that I haven't read yet. And then there's this guy Ryan Holiday,
Yes.
who is maybe the foremost promoter of Stoicism over the past decade or so, and he had a had a website or newsletter called the Daily Stoic. Um, how would you evaluate this, like, modern pop Stoicism, or maybe that's not the right term for it? But well, you have some criticism of Holiday himself, who's an unusual character himself, and is
Who's
unusual to be involved with Stoicism because he used to be a marketer and wrote a book about his wrote a memoir of his time as a marketer about how he lied all the time, which seems very anti-Stoic to be lying.
It does. But on the other hand, as I write in the piece, Ryan Holiday, who seems like a perfectly, nice person, and he certainly or seems to have, decent intentions to educate people about this while also making himself rich. But he comes down he has a prominent place in this long line of Stoics like Seneca, who wrote some of his most searching, beautiful letters to his friends about morality while he was just engaged in gutter politics, at the highest levels, serving as Nero's sort of advisor. And Marcus, who was writing these searching, beautiful meditations while one of his generals was this guy, Avidius Cassius, was just wreaking havoc and killing tens of thousands of people. And Marcus himself, commanding his legionaries, waging war on captive peoples. Like it's complicated. Like Stoicism has always had this proximity to hypocrisy and savagery that is, I think, very interesting. So Holiday is a guy who writes books that I find to be fairly worthless, but I realize a lot of people need, they need the pre-surgical incision of someone who can speak about this stuff in very plain terms before they take the dive into Seneca's letters or Marcus Aurelius, which they're not hard to read. If you have a good translation, they're fairly straightforward, admirably straightforward, I would say. But you kind of have to know a lot of other stuff to get the most out of it. You have to know something about the workings of the Roman Empire. You have to know something about ancient Roman religious belief for some of Marcus's, more preposterous sounding by modern ears postulations. So I've delved into a bunch of neo-Stoic books. I have yet to read one that has affected me as much as the old stuff, which just seems to be much more helpful and much less self-helpy. And, a lot of this neo-Stoicism stuff is about honor and virtue, and that goes pretty quickly into rightist politics in a way that I find very discomforting. And a lot of popularizers of Stoicism just make it sound so broccoli eating and toothbrushy, and I don't like that. I'm much more attracted to the private spectral side of Stoicism, the death part, the part that really teaches you to not care so much about other people's appraisal of you.
Mm.
Um, those are the parts of Stoicism that I've most responded to because look, I'm a writer. My job is getting rejected, and I work in Hollywood. where constantly things are happening to you that you have no control over. And, you can do the best possible job and everything falls apart anyway. And Stoicism has given me an invaluable tool at being able to step back from a situation like that and not becoming bitter and just accepting that my part of the outcome was in my control. My part of the outcome, I behaved with honor. I worked hard. I did the best I could. The rest I couldn't control, and I have to accept the outcome without bitterness. And it's I don't know how many stoic Hollywood screenwriters there are, but I think if there were more of them, it would be a happier place to work.
If someone is interested in learning more about Stoicism, is there a contemporary book you would recommend, or would you say just start with the original text?
Oh, The Practicing Stoic by Ward Farnsworth, I think, is a really decent overview of it. How to Think Like a Roman Emperor by Donald Robertson is a book that is pretty good. And I think he does a very good job at he imagines a version of Marcus Aurelius, like everyone does when you're writing about an ancient figure. You read whatever is written about them and then you imagine the rest. And he gives us his version of Marcus, which is pretty compelling, but I have no idea what it has to do with the real Marcus. But it's a pretty compelling centering of Marcus in his time and place, and also, a bit about his own life. He's someone who lost his father when he was 13 years old, and he was sort of like me, condemned to discovering this philosophy because, of course, Marcus himself lost his father when he was 3 years old. So it seems to be a way of thinking that attracts the fatherless and the rudderless. And I mean that as praise, not as a criticism.
Now, you mentioned there's some sort of right wing online attraction to this stuff, and you mentioned in the essay that when you were looking for Marcus quotes on Twitter, if someone had a Marcus like avatar for their profile, there was a good chance, and this person wasn't like a classicist, there was a good chance this person was like, a quasi-fascist who was advocating, to return to like the martial virtues or
Yes.
something like that.
Yeah.
Well, what do you see? Where do you think that comes from? Is it just sort of like, the that movie 300 and other sort of weirdo, like the attraction of antiquity to reactionaries, or is there something in Stoicism itself that appeals to that sort of personality?
I think there's a lot of the just natural homoerotic, uh, brain dead Western triumphalist thoughts of this was a time when like white dudes ruled the world. Let's go back to that. I mean, I think that's a huge part of the nostalgic part of it for them. But I think your other point is well founded that Stoicism in an unwise person's hands becomes a matter to determine your own virtue by exerting power. And by cutting yourself off from your judgments, it can actually give you permission for sociopathy in a really insidious way, I think. The Larry Ray, the sex cult guy who got all of his daughter's friends in college, basically turned them all into his hookers, which is a story that I still am just flabbergasted by.
Yeah, this is the
He,
guy. Is it Sarah Lawrence?
Sarah Lawrence.
Yeah.
Sarah Lawrence. Yeah, I just started burst out laughing when I'm reading like, the Times piece about, the when the dust settled, they wrote a big piece about it. And I found out that he, basically just started hanging out with all these kids. And how did he hook them? He started talking about Marcus Aurelius. And I thought, well, that's pretty damning, isn't it? That's indicative of the kind of charlatans that this mode of thinking can attract at its worst. And that's why I really cherish the private parts of Stoicism. And I wrote in the piece that the thing I like about Stoicism, it doesn't matter if anyone else practices it. I don't care if I convince anyone to become a Stoic. I find it useful. It's helped me a lot. But even if everyone around me were Stoic, it wouldn't change my fundamental approach to reality now, which is to just not really care so much about what other people are doing and to really kind of focus on the things I can control and the things within the realm of my own, I was going to say the realm of my own control, but I just said that, so I'll be repetitive. It's to focus me that my one true possession is my honor and my virtue. And there are those troublous right-leaning words again. I don't mean them in that way. but my honor and my virtue and my character, for lack of a better word. Those are my truest possessions. And they bleed over into my family and how my family regards me. And if I can provide all of us with a sort of baseline of calm, then maybe my little tiny 3-person family, 4-person if you count the dog, can sort of can sort of just exist in this chaotic, awful world in which bad things happen all the time, that maybe I can just give us some resilience on how to get through those times. And everyone else's beliefs, I don't really concern myself with. As Marcus says, if you meet someone and they seem like a shitty person and then they do a shitty thing, he says, would you be surprised when the fig tree bears figs? And thinking about other people that way is not an invitation to sociopathy. It's not an invitation to even hate them. When I say indifference, I don't mean not caring about them. I just mean not caring about what they do, making me crazy, making me angry. And this is why I think Stoicism is such a useful thing for America at this point. America needs Stoicism because we're a country that is just awash in anger. And it really is an antidote to anger, because anger stems from this idea that someone has done me or my group or my way of thinking wrong, and they didn't pay for it, and I want them to pay for it. And that festers, that feeling festers. And Marcus comes along and says, why are you worrying about that? Like, if they did an injustice to you, they did an injustice to themselves. They didn't do it to you. The best revenge, he says, is not being like your enemy and not treating them like your enemy. And, kind of whoosh, if you really internalize those beliefs, you don't really find that you hate anyone. You can be disappointed by people, but again, separate your judgments from your consequent behavior. It's a very supple, helpful way of just moderating all of the incoming information bombarding you in the modern day world.
I'm glad you brought that up. You don't talk explicitly, I don't think, about politics in the essay, but you do mention 9/11, more about your personal reaction to 9/11 versus your father's, or at least like immediate emotional reaction to 9/11. And it made me think, well, America did not have a very stoic response to 9/11, either
No.
small s or large. And George, probably I bet he like has read Marcus Aurelius at some point because he was reading all the time. But yeah, our policy response is certainly not stoic. And then we just got through probably the least stoic president in American history, like the opposite of a stoic, like the most emotional and reactive man who could possibly ever be president, and who himself was in some ways a reaction to Obama's like sort of stoic personality, or less emotional, reactive at least, personality. And as for Biden in terms of stoicism, I'm not. I'd have to think about it more. Yeah, how do you? What do you think about that?
I think Obama's probably read Meditations more than once. That would be my guess. Because I mean, Marcus Aurelius was the philosopher king, right? He was the emperor of Rome for 20 years. And let's just go back for 1 second and talk about how remarkable that is. That how many times in the history of the world has one of the most powerful people also been one of the wisest, the most cautious about using his own power, the most concerned with his own feelings of kindness and generosity to other people. Like, that's incredible. You could give Donald Trump the Meditations, just like you can, lead a horse to water. But I'm not sure. He'd probably think he was a loser, right? Because he didn't use all the power that he had at his disposal.
Hmm.
But I do feel that you kind of have to be primed to accept this stuff. And I feel like maybe coming out of a massive crisis, like, say, 9/11, or say the financial crisis, or say the Donald Trump presidency for us, thinking about something like Stoicism is a very helpful way to inoculate yourself from, again, those passions that drive us to do unfortunate things. Marcus is always talking about how, oh God, beasts and we have reactions, but we have judgments and beasts do not. And that is the thing that separates us from animals. And giving into those passions, those proto-passions, as Stoics called them, makes yourself animalistic. And it doesn't matter if your cause is good. It doesn't matter if what you're doing is, quote, the right thing. Following heedless passion into situations you haven't thoroughly excavated is a recipe for disaster. And I fear we're heading toward another one right now.
So going back a little bit, the person with the Greco-Roman statuary avatar, um, I assume is very likely to be a man or a teenage boy and not a woman or teenage girl. Is Stoicism sort of like, in the this issue of Harper's, the cover story is by Lauren Euler, and she jokingly says that she wants to be David Foster Wallace for girls. Is Stoicism for boys? Like, there's all this stuff about bravery, and I don't know. It's masculine coded, to use like
I
a
mean,
somewhat
it,
stupid phrase.
it probably is masculine coded. I don't think it should be. I certainly don't think it needs to be. I don't think any of the lessons it teaches are gendered at all. And that, women have just as much of a claim to these traditional masculine ideas of honor and virtue as anyone. And mastering your domain. I mean, I'm raising a daughter, and the thing I'm always harping on is, like, stand up for yourself. Like, don't let people push you around. It's not a very stoic thing to teach her, but the time for stoicism is not when you're 8 years old. So the time for stoicism is when you have a sort of more rational foundation underneath you. But so I'm hugely mindful of how dudeish a lot of this must sound, and I don't like that it sounds like that, but I also have to recognize that it probably does. So I would say, I don't think stoicism is or should be unique to men wanting to emulate some of its lessons. That I think it's actually an incredibly helpful mode of thinking for a person of any gender, especially the stuff about separating emotion from behavior. Because I am someone who historically, when I'm wronged, I would get very angry. And when I was crossed, I would become emotional. And God, Marcus talks about how untraining yourself to be so emotional takes time, but it also, once you do it, or you do a better job of it, you see that, like, reacting in a way like that, in a way that I guess on reality television they'd call drama, all it does is just, it's an endless drama generator. And I guess those people wind up on reality television because reality television producers realize that these cyclotrons of human drama are incapable of controlling their emotions, right? And that, I think, is, to me, the thing that would benefit anyone, no matter who they are, no matter whatever station they are, whatever gender they are, whatever culture they come from. That baseline feeling of not being a slave to your passions.
Mhm. You're making me imagine some sort of reality TV show of like America's Next Top Stoic or something, like who would be, I guess it'd be very boring probably of, because there wouldn't be, it's a very internal thing. And yeah, you know,
That's a great Saturday Night Live skit you just created. America's Next Top
yeah,
Stoic.
or just imagining a Stoic plop down in the average reality TV show. They probably wouldn't be getting up to a lot of entertaining nonsense. Like,
No, they would not.
and so you note that um, a difference between you and your father was that he thought you were often being dramatic,
Mhm.
and he was a Stoic in a small Midwestern Stoic in this small s sense. Um, yeah, I mean, as now that you're um older and less dramatic, how do you look back on your dad's life philosophy, or how he lived, um, compared to the younger version of you who was less small s stoic?
The problem with the way my father lived was that his refusal to feel all the things that he could have. And he was a very affectionate, loving man. Like, I don't want to give you the impression that he wasn't, that he was like the classic withholding guy, because he didn't. He kissed me, he hugged me, he told me he loved me. He was a beautifully affectionate person in that way. But when it came to things like pain and the private feelings we have in our hearts. He was very careful to hide that stuff from other people. He didn't really talk about his quote feelings a lot. He showed his feelings, he didn't share his feelings. And to me, the great danger with Stoicism, which is this, analysis of human fragility, it's a way of shoring up human fragility. The problem with it is that the equanimity that it says is ideal might actually be an impossible ideal to hold, that it might not actually be possible when a maniac guns down your child in a school shooting to say, well, this is the sacred order of the universe, and I'm glad this happened, that fate, foresaw this for me, and that, dying is just a return to the painless place we were before birth, and I can accept this. Like, you don't want to become so stoic that you become a monster. And small s stoicism, I think, can turn you not into a monster in the sense that you're a bad person, but a monster who has so much stuff welled up in them that it almost becomes inaccessible to you. My father didn't have to die when he did. Had he just been a little bit more open about the kinds of pain he was in earlier, he would probably be alive today.
Hmm.
And so I feel like Stoicism, I call it the impossible compromise in the piece, that as a guide, as a set of tools, it's wonderful. It is not the answer, because there are going to be things that happen to you and to me and to anyone listening to this that are going to surpass what Stoicism can help you accept and deal with. And I'd like to think my own death is no longer one of them, but I know for a fact that, God forbid, if something were to happen to any member of my family, Stoicism would feel like a very feeble way of addressing it. Maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. I suspect it would. So that's the danger of these tools.
Right. Um, so your father was a Vietnam veteran, and he was very badly injured during the war. I mean, there must be a connection between his, coming back from that and ability to deal with pain, or desensitization to pain, or just not talking about his own pain because of, he was almost killed. What do you think? I mean, did his life just lead him to become like
Accepting
this?
pain.
Yeah.
I think so. He was a hugely vigorous outdoorsman and a man's man in a lot of ways, despite the hugs and the kisses he gave me. He was a paradoxical guy. Like, he was a Marine and a tough guy, but also a reader of of serious history. And he was a wonderful cook. He was just a weird jumble of contradictions, like how everyone is, fundamentally. And so near the end of his life, he had trouble walking because he had really poor circulation in his feet. And it turned out that, one of his legs had almost just basically been blown off. And the pain had gotten so intense he could no longer walk on it. And I remember sitting with him one day, and I was like, how long has your foot hurt like this? And he looked at me and he said, I don't know, about 35 years.
Wow.
And I just thought, holy shit. Like, he'd just been grin and bearing it for 35 years. I'd gone on some epic walks with that man, and he was walking on a foot that hurt him for decades and never said a word. So what does that tell you? That's harmful stoicism, That's because, the other core message that Marcus constantly circles back to is that people need other people. Like we are rational beings and we need other people. Everything in the meditation circles back to those two things. And my father's brand of kind of Midwestern stoicism steadfastly refuses to accept that we might need other people. You are not enough on your own. You need other people. Like, if they sneeze without covering their mouths, don't lose your shit. If you see a mom and a poorly behaved kid in the grocery store, let it go. You need those people too. We all need each other. And that's the sort of big souled part of stoicism that I admire the most, along with the crabby private internal stuff about, accepting your own inevitable fate.
It's now, the stoicism doesn't make any like supernatural claims, or it's please correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, it seems like Marcus will refer to the gods sometimes, but maybe this could just, in modern parlance, we could just call this fate or something, or just some outside power. Whereas, most other ancient philosophies, even in their modern versions, it's harder to separate a supernatural claim that maybe a modern rational person would have trouble getting their heads around. Um, is this accurate? And
Yes. Yeah, Marcus refers to the gods at various places, but he always couches it in, hey, it might not be real. The gods might not be real. And
Mhm.
he's always, what does he say? He says, like, if you fear death, don't worry about it, because wherever you're going, the gods would never intend to do us any pain, any further pain. And if there are no gods, well, hey, that's not a problem either, because where you're going, that means there will be no pain. And so he very much has the highborn Roman intellectuals sort of carefully hedged view of the divine. The world of thoughtful engagement with reality that Christianity basically nuked in the fourth century. And Marcus was, I think, one of the most admirable and noble thinkers about, I mean, I think he's like a hero of agnosticism, really. And everything, all of his beliefs are just grounded in the utility of them. Like, it's better to be friendly than mean. It's better to be healthy than sick. It's better to be kind than cruel. Like, because you can just see the after effects of those around you. Like, is does a room with 10 people sitting in it feel better when you make someone laugh or when you call someone a fucking asshole?
Uh-huh.
That's really what a lot of stoicism of this branch of thinking about other people, that's what it really comes down to. It's totally utilitarian in a way that the American school of utilitarianism in the 19th century sort of, I think, took a lot out of Marcus and Seneca, a lot of their thinking. William James and all those guys, I think they were very interested in the Stoics.
Let's talk about just the piece as sort of like a literary exploration of these things. You start with the direct aftermath of learning about your father's death, and then you end talking about spreading his ashes, which becomes sort of like a semi-comic scene because it's difficult to spread the ashes. How did you decide to like structure the piece in this way?
I will confess that I am like 100% a gut instinct kind of writer. Like, I just feel my way through it. Um, and the structure sort of occurs to me as I go, and maybe I move some stuff around, but I tend to leave it alone, that part of it, pretty well. I view it as the spookiest part. I never want to overwork structure, because then pieces feel kind of mechanistic. So the structure just came as I went, and a couple of sections were in completely different order. And my editor at Harper suggested, why don't you swap these two sections? I looked at it and I thought that is a good idea. And I did it. And so I tend not to sweat structures so much. Sometimes I think to my favor, sometimes to my ill fortune. But I like letting the piece determine how it wants to be structured. And I had such a natural structure here. Destruction. I said, I have such a natural structure here. It's life and death. Here's the moment I learned he's dead. Here's the moment I put him to rest. And I had a bunch of shit I explored and learned in between. I mean, I don't know how it could have been structured another way. Frankly, you know, sometimes it's pretty clear what the thing has to be.
Mhm. We're probably about towards the end of our time. Is there anything else you want to mention? I feel like we covered most of the stuff in the piece, but there's more. It's very well written, and I found it affecting, and so I encourage people, if they like this conversation, to check out the piece itself. Is there anything else you wanna mention?
Did it make you want to read the Meditations?
It, you know what, it did, and in fact, I saw a copy at a bookstore, and I a couple days ago, and thought about getting it right there. I saw the Penguin edition, but I didn't. But maybe next time I see it,
So in other words,
I
I
will.
failed. I failed. In other words.
But I wouldn't if I hadn't read the piece and I saw it on that, the table of books. My eye would have just gone past it, even though I had been interested in Stoicism and read at least one of these modern pop Stoicism books. But yeah, getting into the real stuff, the the original text, it's both Like it's imposing in some ways, but also it's like, well, you know, you're not going to get the mere, you're not going to get a more pure version of it than the actual original text.
Yeah, and the final thing I'll say about Stoicism is that it's not idolatrous. I don't idolize Marcus or Seneca or any of these people. Seneca himself said that those who made discoveries before us are never our masters; they are always our guides. And that would be the spirit I would encourage anyone who's coming to Stoic thinking about. A, don't worry about anyone else, and B, think of these books not as ways that you have to live your life, you must change to be successful or to be happy. No, they're guides who figured some stuff out that worked for them and approach it as a set of tools that maybe this will work. Maybe you have some anxieties and some hangups that really bug you that you don't know how to talk about to other people. I heartily encourage anyone listening to read Seneca and read Marcus, not like people reading the Gospels, not like the sacred texts are being handed to you, but in the spirit of just thinking about these very brilliant people who are clearly trying to help other human beings deal with the same problems they had.
Okay, that's a great place to end things. If people are more interested in uh, more of your work, where would you direct them to look?
I have absolutely no social media presence at all. I don't
Very
exist.
wise.
Yeah, it's I quit Facebook in God 2013 or something. That was the only thing I ever had. If you want to find more of my work, you can buy my books. They're available on Amazon and at independent bookstores across the nation. And you know, I've written dozens and dozens and dozens of things that are on the internet that you can just find. Google my name, and I'm sure they'll pop up along with praise and invective for yours truly. But that's fine too.
Yes,
So yeah,
you note in the piece that there was a point where you were like very excited about a positive review of a book of yours, and you were excitedly reading it to your dad, and he was sort of like, "Why do you care about that?"
yeah.
Um,
And what is the great quote? And I now quote this all the time to my writer friends. Now, all my friends who get upset about or excited about a review, praise makes nothing better or worse. My God, what a wise insight that is. It makes nothing better or worse. And really, who cares? Yeah, that'd be the other thing. Who cares? I miss my dad. So thank you for letting me talk about him for a while.
oh well, thank you for taking the time. So the essay, once again, in Harper's "Time is a Violent Stream." You know, I don't care about praise either, but what something that does care about praise is the Apple podcast algorithm. So you can rate and review this podcast, and that helps more people find it. And yeah, okay.
The funny thing is that algorithm probably has read the meditations and it just did not sink in.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole different topic.
Yes.
What's more stoic than an algorithm? Doesn't feel anything, but yeah. Something to think about. Well, okay, Tom, thank you for coming on. Thanks to all of the listeners out there, and we'll see you again next time.